This whole video is gonna be me fixing my nose piercings and looking like I'm picking my nose. Hi everyone, welcome to Crime with Calypso. My name is Kate and today I'm going to be bringing you the story of the Black Widow of Sacramento. But before I get started, I just want to give a disclaimer that I don't mean any disrespect to any of the people involved in this case, any of the family members involved. I'm not an expert. This is just all information that I've gathered on the internet that I have compiled all together into one video, and I'll leave all my sources and such in the description below. But without further ado, let's get into the case of the Black Widow of Sacramento, Dorothea Puente. Also known as the Grandma Serial Killer and the Death House Landlady, born Dorothea Helen Gray on January 9th, 1929 in Redlands, California. She was an active serial killer from 1982 to 1988, and her confirmed victim count was 9. Her unconfirmed total to 6 additional murder victims, and she was only officially convicted of 3 of these, but we will get into that bit of the case a little bit later. Now, Dorothea had a poor upbringing. Both of her parents were alcoholics, and both of them unfortunately died young. I read reports that said that her parents died within a year of each other around the time that she was 8 or 9. And after that, she was put into an orphanage where she was mistreated, assaulted. I'm not going to go into detail with that, but I'm sure you guys can imagine. Dorothea's life of crime, however, did not start at the murder. She had a life of crime before that, and that is what I'm going to get into now. As you can tell from the title of this video, she was married multiple times. I'm going to be talking about her 4 marriages that I could find records of in this video. When Dorothea got married for the first time, it was to a soldier named Fred McFall. She was only 16 years old at the time, though I saw some articles mention that she was 22, but most say 16, so that's what I'm going with in this video. The two had 2 children together, one of which that they sent to Sacramento to live with relatives, and the other they put up for adoption. They then got pregnant for a 3rd time, but unfortunately Dorothea had a miscarriage. I couldn't find a lot of information about what happened after this 3rd pregnancy, but at some point Fred left Dorothea. Now, this is around the time that Dorothea begins forging checks, and she eventually gets arrested for it, but she only spends 6 months in jail before she's paroled. Shortly after her release, she has another daughter with some man whose name is never really mentioned, and she gives her up for adoption as well. And that brings us to 1952, when Dorothea marries Axel Johansson. The marriage lasts 14 years. In 1960, Puente is arrested and sentenced to 90 days in jail for owning and running a brothel. And shortly after her release, she's rearrested for some form of vagrancy, and she spends another 60 to 90 days in jail. And after that, when she's released, that's when she begins work as a nurse's aide, working with the elderly and the disabled. And this is where she begins a trend that we'll see later on when it comes to her murderous crimes. In 1966, Dorothea divorces Johansson, and this is when she marries a man named Roberto Puente, but their marriage only lasts 2 years. This is when Dorothea begins to manage a boarding house at 2100 F Street in Sacramento, California. And as a Sacramento native, I know where that is. It's now been renovated into a museum. You can do tours of it. So at the time, this was a 3-story, 16-room care home. And she also began to manage the apartment above the site at 1426 F Street. Her next marriage only lasts a few months, so in 1976 she marries a violent alcoholic named Pedro Montalvo. She once again begins forging checks, and after this marriage ended, she began a new scam where she would go out to the bars and to different places, and she would find older men who would be receiving benefits from different things, and she would forge their checks and receive money that way. Eventually, Dorothea was caught and charged with 34 counts of treasury fraud, for which, once again, she receives probation. It is believed that Dorothea's murders began shortly after she began to rent space in the boarding home. In April 1982, Ruth Monroe, who was 61 years old at the time, lived with Dorothea in the F Street apartment. Shortly, Monroe died of a codeine and acetaminophen overdose, and Dorothea told the police that she had been depressed about a recent relationship ending, and so her death was ruled a suicide. Soon after this, a 74-year-old man named Malcolm McKenzie accuses Dorothea of drugging and stealing from him. She was charged and convicted of theft in August 1982 and was sent to jail for 5 years. This is when Dorothea begins a romantic pen pal relationship with a 77-year-old man named Everson Gilmouth. Are you eating my plant? Okay, thanks for visiting. Dorothea ends up being released after just 3 years, so she's in jail all of these times and never is spending the full sentence there. So when she's released after just 3 years, Gilmouth, her new boyfriend, her new pen pal boo, picks her up in a red 1980 Ford pickup truck. Fast forward to November 1985, Dorothea hires Ishmael Flores to install some wood paneling in the apartment in exchange for $800 and a red 1980 Ford pickup truck. And she says that the truck belongs to her boyfriend who has gone to LA and no longer needs this truck. But it didn't stop there. She also asked Flores to build a 6x3x2 wooden box for books and other items. Filled and nailed shut, Dorothea requests that Ishmael drive this coffin. It's a coffin, it's a box, to a storage depot, but on the way she makes him pull over at this riverbank and says, let's just dump it here. So that's what they do. He questions it a little bit, but ends up doing it anyway. Later, on January 1st, 1986, a fisherman spots the same box that they had dropped off into that riverbank and called the police. And when investigators found the box, inside they found the badly decomposed and decaying body of an unidentifiable elderly man. Meanwhile, Dorothea continued to collect his pension and even write his family, declaring that he was ill and that's why he couldn't write them himself. She also took in up to 40 more tenants in the house during this time, and most of which were elderly or drug users, alcoholics, things like that. There's a lot of conflicting reports. Some neighbors thought she was kind of sketchy, a little weird, noticed weird things about them, but some neighbors found her caring and sweet and just this little old lady down the street who was helping all these people get back on their feet. So there were a lot at the time of people who were divided about this case and confused as to how this sweet old lady could commit these crimes. So all this time with her tenants, she would steal their mail, take their money and their social security checks, and she'd give them like stipends and portions of that money, but then keep the rest of it, keep the majority of it to cover expenses from them living there and things like that. And although parole officers visited the home on multiple occasions, because remember, she was arrested for owning a brothel, she's not supposed to be around elderly people like that because she has been arrested for taking advantage of them before. And although parole officers were called to the residence on multiple occasions, there were never any claims filed, and no one ever reported anything. And Dorothea continued to do what she was doing and continued to collect the money from her tenants. So the first point at which neighbors began to grow suspicious of Dorothea is when she adopts a homeless man. I don't know what that means. In the articles I read, that was the terminology it seemed that she used when she was referring to this man who goes by Chief. And she hires him as a handyman, and she has him dig in the basement, remove soil and trash from different parts of the property, and she also has him install a concrete slab in the basement floor, above the basement floor, and that is the last job he completes for Dorothea before he goes missing. November 11th, 1988, police become aware of a missing tenant named Alvaro Montoya. Montoya was said to be developmentally disabled and schizophrenic and was reported missing when he didn't show up for his meetings with his social worker. So after Montoya is reported missing, police head to the F Street boarding house in order to investigate. Upon investigating, police uncover the body of a 78-year-old tenant of the house named Leona Carpenter. And while they continued to search the home, eventually 7 bodies were found to be buried at the residence. At first, Dorothea wasn't even a suspect. My mother remembers on the news she wanted a cup of coffee. Dorothea wanted a cup of coffee, and she walks out of the home and walks down the street, and police just let her walk right past them. And when she left to go get this cup of coffee, she actually fled to Los Angeles, where she was eventually discovered, recognized, apprehended, and arrested. And that brings us to the trial and the conviction. Dorothea is charged with 9 counts of murder for the deaths of her boyfriend, Everson Gilmouth, for Ruth Monroe, for Leona Carpenter, Alvaro Montoya, as well as additional tenants of the home, Dorothy Miller, who was 64, 55-year-old Benjamin Fink, 62-year-old James Gallup, 64-year-old Vera Faye Martin, and 78-year-old Betty Palmer. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail with the aspects of the trial because this video would just be way too long. The defense had a lot of witnesses that were brought to the stand to show Dorothea's caring and loving side, to make her look like this sweet old grandma who could never commit these crimes. And it more or less worked. Dorothea was only convicted of 3 of the 9 murders. The other 6 that the jury could not agree on, and she was given 2 life sentences. She died at age 82, serving those 2 life sentences at the Central California Women's Correctional Facility, and she died of natural causes. And up until her death, Dorothea maintains her innocence and claims that her tenants all died of natural causes. But even if they did die of natural causes, she continued to cash their checks and forge their signatures. And that is all I have for the Black Widow of Sacramento. This was my first video, my first case that I covered. I didn't want to go into too much detail, but I thought it would be cool to start off with something that's kind of local, familiar to me. In fact, my cousin actually went on a date with her grandson, with Dorothea's grandson. So that was something I found out while I was researching for this video. Like I mentioned, my mom recalling the case and recalling watching it on the news and watching it unfold and everything. The sources I use for this video can be found in the description, and I especially enjoyed listening to the episode of the And That's Why We Drink podcast that Christine featured the case on. Wanted to thank everyone for watching, and hopefully I'll figure this out again and be back with another video maybe, if I don't cry and hate myself after I finish uploading this. This lovely necklace that I'm wearing in the video is made by my friend Care. It's green fluorite, which enhances intuition, and you can check out all of her handmade jewelry, always made with care, on her Instagram, which will be on the screen now. Go ahead and check her out and support her. Ow!